First, I'm going to recite the bracha for dwelling in the sukkah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu leishev basukkah. All right, and so now why don't we recite our bracha together, mostly for learning Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. All right, so I sent an email earlier this morning, not sure if you had a chance to get it. Last time that we learned together, which was about a month ago, we started our study of the Shema, and hopefully today we'll be able to finish our exploration of the Shema as it appears in our Siddur. So I'm gonna briefly mention the topics that we covered last time. So first, we talked about the meaning of the first line. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Is this one sentence? Is it two sentences? What is meant by Echad? Is it a statement of monotheism? Is it a statement of fealty? All of those aspects of the translation. We also talked about the next sentence, Ve'ahavta. What does that mean? What does it mean to love in the context of Deuteronomy, in the context of the Siddur? And we talked about how love is not emotional the way we think of it today, that it's more of a covenantal love, a sense of these are the things that I do as an expression of my covenantal, of my commitment to the covenant. And then we talked about how these passages, which, in their pshat, in their context in the Torah, are not liturgical at all. They are statements by Moses to exhort the Israelites to stay faithful to God and to the covenant, but that from a pretty early stage during mid-Second Temple period or even earlier, already these passages were being used to in some sort of liturgical fashion, and then that really served as the kind of the anchoring point for our liturgy as the rabbis came to develop it. And finally, we started talking about how to recite the Shema, right? So the mechanics of it, and that we're going to continue with that a bit today. The Mishnah, while we saw that the Mishnah is a little bit vague on all of the various blessings and what the words are, we have some themes, but we don't have the specifics. For the Shema, we get a lot of detail about how to recite the Shema correctly. Which should suggest how important it was for the rabbis as they're putting our service together. So we talked about what time of day to recite the Shema, morning and evening. In what position should we recite the Shema? Lying down, sitting down, standing. We talked about kavanah, which is not like necessarily really feeling it, but as the rabbis use the term, kavanah seems to be having intention to fulfill my religious obligations as I'm saying these words. And then finally, we talked about interruptions during the recitation. If somebody comes in and says hello to me while I'm in the middle of the Shema, am I allowed to stop the Shema in order to respond to them? And the answer is, it depends, right? Is this person a great scholar? Is this person the king? And then depending on the status of whoever is wishing me a good Shabbos, I should or should not respond. And then if it's like the king, I should actually initiate the greeting. I should stop what I'm doing and initiate the greeting. So those are the areas that we covered last time. So now we're going to continue. Before we continue, let's just remind ourselves about the Shema. can see there's a first line. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Below that, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. This is not part of the Shema. It is not included in the Torah. This is an additional line, and it seems to be, this is the line that people recite when they hear God's name, the Tetragrammaton, Yud He Vav He, being invoked. So it got included. It was recited during temple times. So back in that early proto service that we talked about, when people would be up in the temple and they would hear the Shema, this seems to be how they would respond. And we have vestiges of that in the high holidays by reciting this line out loud on Yom Kippur, in kind of emulation of what took place in the temple. Although I think it's the case then in many, if not all, Reform synagogues, that the Baruch Shem line is recited out loud year round. Is that correct? I see Mike nodding.
Yes.
Okay. And then we have
slightly quieter, but recited.
And then we have the continuation, Ve'ahavta, you shall love the Lord your God, etc., etc. Okay, we're going to continue where we've left off with the Mishnah. And now we're going to start to see exactly how important this was.
Yeah.
We have no sound.
Yeah, we lost you.
How is that possible?
There you are.
Now you have sound?
Yes.
Sound.
I don't know what to say. All right. Well, hopefully all right. Hopefully it'll stick. All right. So the Mishnah begins, Hakorei et Shema. Person is reading the Shema, and you recall also that the verb for reciting the Shema is korei, to read or to call out. Hakorei et Shema, velo hishmiya leozno yatsa. So hishmiya, right? So Shema, hishmiya is the hiphil and the hiphil form of the verb, which is causative. So if a person is reading the Shema, velo hishmiya leozno, his ear, he doesn't make it heard, audible for his ear, he is yatsa. He has still literally gone out, but that's the term that the rabbis use to refer to fulfilling their obligation. It's yatsa yedei chovato. He has gone out from the hands of his duty. So you're reciting the Shema, but you do it very quietly. So quietly that you can't even hear yourself. That still counts. That's what the Mishnah is suggesting. But Rabbi Yossi Omer lo yatsa. Rabbi Yossi says no. He has not fulfilled his obligation. So what does this tell us? It tells us it's really important to say the Shema out loud, right? You got to hear yourself saying the Shema. Why do you think that might be?
But that appears to be a minority opinion because there's no one person attached to the opposite opinion. So presumably that's the majority.
Yes, but the fact that the Tanakama, the anonymous voice of the Mishnah, even has to say this would suggest that there's still a preference for making it audible.
Well, isn't it because it says Shema?
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward, right? The verse says listen, right? So if you can't actually hear it, have you fully fulfilled what the commandment is? So that's all right. So it's got to be out loud. That's our first detail. Kara velo dikdek beotioteha. What is dikduk?
Grammar.
Grammar, right? So a person reads velo dikdek. Dikdek means to be precise, right, or careful, right? He wasn't, like in your pronunciation, he wasn't very precise beotioteha with its letters, right? He kind of mumbled through them, right? Rabbi Yossi Omer yatsa, Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo yatsa. Rabbi Yossi says he still fulfilled the obligation. Rabbi Yehuda says he's not fulfilled the obligation. If you read the letters wrong, right? If you read the words wrong, you've not fulfilled your obligation to recite the Shema. Right?
So which one's halakha?
Which one's halakha? Well, let's see. Hakorea lemafreya lo yatsa. He reads it out of order. He's not fulfilled his obligation. Hara v'ta'a yachazor lamakom sheta'a. He's reading along and he makes a mistake. He should go back to the place where he made a mistake, right? So you don't have to go all the way back to the beginning, but you have to go back to the word that you stumbled on. Is this surprising?
Do people generally have an issue with making mistakes and going out of order?
Oh, I don't know about going out of order. Making mistakes, big time.
Well, that, yeah. Depends.
There are a lot of subtle vowels in the V'ahavta, or different weird consonant blends. I don't know if it's difficult for a native speaker, but it's like an obstacle course.
It is. It's not so easy. I'm going to point out one of my pet peeves. All right, so we're in V'ahavta. We get to, all right, Vishinantam levanecha, you'll teach them to your children. V'dibarta bam, you'll speak to them. You'll speak of them. B'shivtecha b'veitecha, when you're dwelling in your house. Uvlechtecha v'derech, and when you're going out on the way, on the road. Next word. Right. Yeah. Uvshoch b'cha, right? That's actually a kamatz katan under the shin, so it's an O. Uvshoch b'cha. Uvkumecha, when you lie down and when you rise up. But if you listen carefully, and to what people are saying, in almost every synagogue I've ever been to, you will hear a sizable number, if not everyone in the shul, instead of saying uvshoch b'cha, saying uvshochtecha, which means, anyone? Shochet, uvshochtecha.
Oh, slaughter.
Slaughter.
Slaughter, right? You shall speak of them when you slaughter and when you rise up.
Oops.
Yeah, oops, exactly, right. So now we all know, uvshochtecha, right? I think there's something about just it's easier for our mouths to say uvshochtecha than uvshochtecha.
No, not for me.
I said that.
So Rabbi, is that a bet sound or a vet sound at the end? At the second to the last letter? Because there's a dot.
It's a bet. Uvshochtecha.
Okay.
Yeah, uvshochtecha. Okay, so now, all right. So pronunciation counts, right? This is, you know, whoever is the Tanakama here was a grammar teacher. Sure. All right, next Mishnah.
Yeah, I have some question.
Okay.
When you read it, you have to say hat and quf and ayn.
We're not done yet with the pronunciation. We'll get into more detail in a moment.
Okay.
I want to continue in the Mishnah. Ha'umanin korin barosh ha'ilan over rosh nidbach. Mashe'enan rasha'in lasod kein batfila. So an uman is a worker, right? An artisan. Omanut is art, right? So an artisan or a worker, korin, can read it, can recite the Shema, barosh ha'ilan, at the top of the tree, right? So what am I doing up on top of the tree? Let's say I'm an arborist, right? Or a wood chopper. I'm up in the top of the tree, and all of a sudden the time for reciting the Shema has arrived, right? Or barosh hanidbach, on top of the scaffolding, right? I don't know. I'm painting the roof of the Sistine Chapel, right? The time for the Shema has come. I can say it up there. I say it where I am, right? I don't take the time to come down and say it in a different spot, because it's more important that I say it correctly at the right time when it occurs to me. I might be tempted to say, you know what, let me finish doing whatever it is I'm doing and I'll get to it later, but I might forget. And so it's more important that I do it there. But mashe'enan rashein lasod kein batfila. You're not allowed to do this with the tefillah, which that's the amidah, right? The amidah, you do need to, you know, get into a proper place for it. But you can see how important the Shema is, that, you know, saying it at the right time is even more important than being in the right place.
So you can do the initial part of your prayers before, because you usually do both when you do the whole thing. So you can do up until the Shema, and you finish the Shema, and then you wait until you can do the Shemona Esrei?
Well, let's keep in mind the time period that we're in, right? This is the Mishnah. So this is really early. We don't have prayer books that put them all together. And the idea of reciting the Shema with the blessings and the Amidah, and by the way, all those other brachot that we talked about already, the morning wake-up blessings, these are all individual mitzvot. They're independent, right? And it's only when we get to Rav Amram Gaon that somebody for the first time created a comprehensive Siddur that puts all of them together, right? Now, it seems that already in his day, the communities had already come together to be reciting these as a group, but we even saw disputes about whether or not those morning blessings should be recited in synagogue or should people be reciting them on their own. And so there's this consolidation that eventually happens where all of these things are done with a minyan. But here, I mean, the Mishnah is very clearly entertaining the possibility that an arborist is saying the Shema with the blessings, without the blessings, I don't know. It's more important to just say the Shema at the right time, and then at a later time is coming down from the tree and saying the Amidah.
So if no one has a prayer book and they have the thing memorized, presumably they would know what the words mean. They could pronounce them properly. They don't have the slaughter problem that we have.
You assume a lot.
Maybe they have a speech impediment. Who knows?
How do you know that you pronounced something wrong?
Yeah, if you don't have a book.
Yeah,
That's a good question.
Well, now that we have books, isn't there a rule? I don't know if it's a law, but a rule that you're supposed to still pray with the Siddur, I guess, just in case, like, so you can catch mistakes that might slip into your davening.
I mean, that's certainly what I suggest, especially if somebody's leading services.
But also another idea, when you hear people speak, there are people sometimes who don't pronounce English correctly, just in everyday speech. So there's no reason not to assume that people then even would make the same type of errors just from lack of knowledge.
Absolutely, or just speed, right? I mean, not their services were shorter, but nowadays, someone who is completely fluent, a very fast Hebrew reader, knows all this stuff, is still going to slur and stumble over the words, right? I mean, I do that. I'm pretty fast, right? So I can read them to myself. I can read them out loud pretty quickly, and if I'm going fast, and there's pressure to go fast because we've got a lot of material to cover and lunch is waiting, stumbling happens, right?
but the concept of doing it wrong, but nobody's there to hear it, just like the tree falls in the forest, you're on top of the tree, you're the arborist. I mean, so where does that become an issue?
All right. So what is the mistake that a person made? Maybe I recited it out of order, right? Maybe I realized, and I have done this, right? Because I'm doing it from memory, and I go along, and then I realize I think I just skipped over a couple of sentences, or because there's similarities between the first and the second paragraph of the Shema, it's not inconceivable to accidentally jump to the version in the second paragraph of the Shema while you're in the first, or vice versa.
But if you do that, there's a congregation there that'll point it out to you. Maybe. But if you're alone somewhere,
I'm alone. I've done this alone.
Yeah, but you're aware, you're self-aware that you have done it. But what is the?
Well, I guess if I'm not aware, then I can't go back and redo it.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't get a gold star that day, I guess. I gotta check minus.
Yeah. I have some comments. When you say it orally without looking in the book, you do very mechanical work, producing sound. When you involve your eyes to read the text at the same time, your brain starts to be involved in the stuff. It's not automatic process.
Mm-hmm.
so that the requirement that you read it is just to make you with kavanah, as you said before. That means your brain is involved in the process of the prayer.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Is that if we're reading it, it's easier to be paying attention in some degree to what we're saying than if we're doing it from memory. Or when you're doing it from memory, I think there's more of a risk of kind of not being present with the words.
Exactly, it's mechanical.
Yeah. Okay, so let's, all right, so we saw the workers. Next one, you're gonna like this one. Chatan, a bridegroom. Patur mikriyat shema balayla harishon ad motzei Shabbat im lo asa maaseh. All right, so a bridegroom is exempt from having to recite the Shema on the first night, like on this wedding night, all the way up until Motzei Shabbat, after Shabbat is over, right? Im lo asa maaseh, if he has not done the deed.
Is that the same as our euphemism today?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's not the prayer. This is the-
So the bridegroom is exempt. Why? Why is a bridegroom exempt?
His mind probably is not in the Shema.
His mind is
He's
not.
got better thing to do.
Sorry, what's that?
Mind is
Matt?
elsewhere.
Yeah, he's going to be distracted. So yeah. So bridegroom does not have to daven the Shema until after he.
What about the bride?
Well, so that's a good question. Clearly, the rabbis are not as very concerned with the bride.
I think they have to do it together.
I think maybe that could be very, very nice.
Sounds very romantic.
Yeah. The rabbis don't consider this to be an obligation for women in the same way. Right. Clearly they're not kind of concerned with the bride in this Mishnah.
Especially with the time bound part of it and how.
Yeah,
you
perhaps
do
the
it
time
exactly
bound.
at
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, so there's a general obligation, traditionally there's a general obligation for women to pray every day. It's just not bound to specific times and specific liturgies. All right, but the Mishnah is not done. Maaseh b'Rabban Gamliel, shekarav alala rishon shenasa. So once happened that Rabban Gamliel, he davened the Shema the very same evening that he got married, right? Presumably before he had a chance to do the deed. Amrulo Talmidav, his students said to him, and what they were doing there, I don't know. Loli Madtanu, Rabbeinu, Shekatan Patur Mikriyat Shema Balala Rishon, said, haven't you taught us, our teacher, that the bridegroom is exempt from saying the Shema on the first night? Amar Lahem, Eini Shomea Lachem Levatel Mimeni Malchut Shemayim Afilu Sha'a Echat. He says, I'm not going to listen to you to deny, for me to deny the kingship of heaven for even one moment.
That's more important than his wife.
It's more important, right? And as we're going to see, the recitation of the Shema, that first line specifically, but really the entire first paragraph, is considered to be the acceptance of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven upon oneself. And so the beginning of the Mishnah is suggesting that it's not, let's say the passions are too intense to be able to kind of consciously accept that. But Rabban Gamliel is not willing to go there. I feel sorry for his wife.
No problem. So it's only apply for the first wife. After you get married to
gosh.
5, you don't have to worry about that.
We're going
I'm sure
to
I wanna be this one.
we're going to leave this mission aside. I thought it'd be a fun diversion. All right, how to recite the Mishnah? We saw the word dakdek or dikduk, right? You got to be very precise in reciting the Shema. And I thought we should maybe see an example of what that might actually mean, to be precise. So this is from Maimonides, Rambam, in the Mishnah Torah, which this is his great law code. So we're talking 12th century. He writes a comprehensive code of Jewish law, everything, and includes lots of history and philosophy and theology, as well as the halachot. And he creates his own organizational structure. And he has a section, 4 chapters long, about the rules for saying the Shema. So this is in chapter 2, halacha number 9. So he says, he begins, Ketzad yidakdek. How should one be grammatically correct, let's say? How should one pronounce the words correctly? So one should take heed not to sound a letter with a strong dagesh. Dagesh here doesn't mean the dot, it means accent, right? Sound a letter with a strong accent as if it were without such a strong accent, nor a letter without a strong accent as though it had such an accent, right? So in other words, you've got to accent the correct syllable, right? Right? Don't say syllable, syllable, right? Or syllable in English, right? So you gotta accent the correct syllable, nor sound a letter with a shva mobile as if it were immobile, nor vice versa, sound a letter with a shva immobile as if it were mobile. So what we're saying is, so the Shema, the silent letter, either has a sound or doesn't have a sound. Let's look at the word at the top, the Hebrew word on the page, yidakdek. So yeah, there's a shva under the yud, there's a shva under the kuf, right? That's the 2 dots, one on top of each other. Yeah, does that make a sound?
Yes.
Yeah.
It does, right? That is the shva mobile, right? In Hebrew, it's the shva na. It's a moving shva. And what it indicates is that the syllable is open. It ends with a vowel sound. Yeah, right? We have a consonant yeah, that's the yud. And then yeah. We don't have a closing consonant. Now, how about the next one? Under the kuf.
No.
Yidak. There's no sound there, right?
Right.
So that's a shva immobile, a shva nach. It's a resting shva. And what that indicates is that the syllable is closed. It ends with a consonant sound. So y versus dak. So what Rambam is saying is that you've got to pronounce your shvas correctly. Wow, right? This is detailed.
So you can't say yidakadek.
No, you cannot say yidakadek. Right.
I
Hence
have
also.
a question. Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Some people say stuff yidakdek, you say dakdek.
Dakdik?
That, yeah, Mil-El and Mil-Ra. Is it included in this Rambam because he was Sephardic, and the Ashkenazic say differently. So they pronounce the Svanach, and now correctly, they put the instead of Mil-Ra, they're doing Mil-El. The emphasis on the.
So this is referring to the first part of this statement, which has to do which syllable is accented. So in Ashkenazi pronunciation, which I think is probably following Yiddish pronunciation, they tend to accent the penultimate syllable of the word, the second to last.
Mhm.
All right, let's take an example. Good Shabbos, right? Shabbos, I've just accented the Shah.
Mhm.
Shab, good Shabbos, right? That would be an Ashkenazi pronunciation. Sephardim would pronounce it correctly in the Hebrew, in which case the last syllable is the accented one, Shabbat, right? Good Shabbat, right? Or really easier, Shabbat Shalom. You may have heard Ashkenazi say Shabbos Shalom, right? Again, that's the Yiddish pronunciation, or the Ashkenazi pronunciation, where I'm accenting the first syllable. So that's correct from the perspective of accenting according to Ashkenazi custom. It's incorrect in terms of accenting it according to the laws of Hebrew grammar and syntax. And I'm pretty sure that Ashkenazim who are careful about this, when it comes to the Shema, are accenting it correctly according to the Hebrew, right? they also accent it correctly when they're chanting Torah, right? Because one of the jobs of the ta'amim of all the trope notes is to tell us which syllable is the accented syllable. It's very precise in that way. And so that's why, you'll see often the Shema, since all 3 paragraphs are from the Torah, it's printed in Siddurim with the accent from the Torah.
So what do we consider in our conservative movement, in our synagogue, pronouncing the Ashkenazi versus the Hebrew? Does it matter?
Does it matter?
Does it matter to you, or does it matter to the movement, or does it matter to anyone?
All right. So does it matter to me? Yes, because it sounds grating when it's not pronounced correctly.
Right.
Let's say when it's not pronounced according to the rules of Hebrew grammar. We can see that for the Shema specifically, the halacha considers it very important to pronounce it correctly.
It also leads
For
to
other parts of the service, we're a little bit less, less
Stringent.
narrow in our focus. I'll give another example. The prayer before the Shema, Ahava Rabbah, right? So you will hear some people get up and say Ahava Rabbah, Ahavtanu, right? Pronouncing the ah of Ahava.
Mhm.
That's incorrect. It's the last syllable that should be pronounced. Ahava Rabbah, Ahavtanu.
Mhm.
Right.
Okay.
Actually, pronouncing the first syllable doesn't even work with the melody. You have to squish stuff together. Ahava Rabbah, Ahavtanu. It doesn't quite work. It's the melody was written for the correct pronunciation in mind. Now, sometimes you'll run into melodies that seem to be accenting the wrong syllable, and I don't know if the composer knew what was doing or didn't care or what. So.
Yeah, I have some comments. When you're speaking Ashkenazic, you sometimes distort the meaning of the word. For example, ki kolech arev u'marech naveh. When you're speaking in Ashkenazic, it's ki kolech orev. Orev is like cruel. That means extremely bad sound. Orev is an animal, right? The black one.
Raven, yeah.
Raven.
Yep.
So instead of saying your sound is nice, tasty, you say it's like a raven, which is
Not so nice, right?
just the opposite. And this is just mil run.
Right. So what Oded is pointing out is that by accenting the wrong syllable, you can have the identical consonants, identical vowels, but just a different accented syllable, and it can completely change the meaning of the word. And the example he just gave is the word orev versus orev. One of them means raven, another one means like beautiful.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
Quite a different meaning.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and so as we saw, where there's a preference for reciting the Shema so that we can hear ourselves, right? And fulfillment of Shema, listen, right? So the listening is really important. And so listening to the words read correctly is really important.
So I still question whether, if you're so focused on pronouncing the words so correctly, not making a mistake, not getting out of order,
Mhm.
do you lose intention in your heart and soul for the prayer itself if you're so focused on that mechanic?
I would say potentially, but the opposite could happen also. It might draw you more into the meaning, right? I mean, I think that, I'm just thinking about my own experience, where, at the seminary, certain teachers really focused on reading Hebrew correctly, and because the proper pronunciation affects meaning.
Mhm.
And so in that case, when I'm paying attention to pronouncing it correctly, in fact, I am drawn into the meaning in a deeper way. And so I find that it often enhances my my own kavanah.
Rabbi,
Rob, I have a question.
Let's Barbara first, yeah.
sorry. Does it matter how you pronounce the resh in Hebrew?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah. Romeo, is that you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question. So there are all these groups in New York, in Brooklyn, that speak Yiddish still, and maybe in Israel too. So how do they pronounce the Hebrew?
My suspicion is that when they pronounce most of the prayers, they're doing it using Ashkenazi pronunciation, but that they probably are precise when they get to the Shema. Right? Because the law codes are so clear about pronouncing it correctly. I mean, Maimonides, he's saying you've got to accent the right accents, and that matters. And so I would think that even if you're a Hasidic, that you're going to read this and pronounce it accordingly.
How do
Thank
you
you.
know whether a Sheva is mobile or immobile?
You know, because you know the rules of grammar.
But Rabbi, that's what I'm wondering. An ordinary Hebrew speaker in Israel, do they follow all these rules correctly?
Israelis tend to butcher Torah readings because modern Hebrew is very simplistic in its grammar relative to biblical Hebrew.
Really?
It's really simplified it, right? And so when they say that modern Hebrew follows Sephardi pronunciation, that's not really true. Modern Hebrew has simplified Sephardi pronunciation. And one of the things that the reason that a lot of Israelis, unless they've really learned how to do it correctly, the reason they stumble is because they're reading the biblical Hebrew, expecting it to read the way they would read modern Hebrew, which tends to be printed without any vowels of any sort. So
the thing is, or what's correct is only when Israel was created and they decided that Sephardi was the correct pronunciation. Isn't it?
Yeah, but these languages tend to develop. I mean, there is what is it? Is it an agency in charge of the Hebrew language? I forget its official name. Yeah, Vad Alashon. So yeah, the Institute of the Language. So, and their job, supposedly is to decide what is correct and incorrect as far as modern Hebrew is concerned, right? Now, do people follow them, right? I mean, this is true in any language, right? There's these are dynamic forces that nobody can actually control. You can try to control them, but
I think the way you pronounce the language, let you do the dots and all the stuff under and over the letter correctly. That means one of the tests you have to do after high school, you get some paragraph from the Bible without the dots, and you have to put it correctly. And you use the way you pronounce the word every day, listen to it and decide right away how to put all the dots. Yeah. That means though you know the rules, but just by listening, if to the way it's written correctly, you can put all the dots right away with no major difficulties. Because if you look for the rules, that's extremely complicated.
Yeah, the rules are extremely complicated, right? So,
but if you listen, you can know what to do it easily.
Maybe, but in my experience, when Israelis come, and unless they're experienced Torah readers, when they try and take a Torah reading, they tend to come in confident that they can do it and then don't do it correctly. By the way, it's not even just Torah reading. The prayer for Israel, right, which is in our Siddur. So we would often have somebody, come up and read it, preferably if they're able to read it in Hebrew. And it was written in the 1940s. There's some debate about whether Bialik wrote it or Herzog wrote it, but Israelis make mistakes on that also, because it's not written in modern Hebrew. It's written in kind of a biblical style or an older style of Hebrew. And so there's certain words that Israelis mispronounce.
Bialik wrote it in Ashkenazic Hebrew, and he was one of the biggest opponents of transferring the Hebrew language to Sephardic. He wanted to keep it Ashkenazic.
Yeah.
And all his literature and poetry is actually based on the rhythm of the Ashkenazic language. And today it's really pronounced completely different, correctly, but different.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on. Hence also a pause should be made between two words where the first of the two words ends with the letter with which the one immediately following it begins, right? In other words, the last letter of a word and the first letter of the next word are the same. You got to make sure to pause between them so they don't run together. For example, in reading the words bechol levavecha, right? We got a lamed. A pause should be made after the word bechol before reading levavecha. The same practice should be observed in the case of va'avadetem mehera. Right, we have a mem there, va'avadetem mehera, and hakanaf patil. Right, there it's not even pronounced the same, but it's a fe and a pay. Got to make sure to separate it. Right. So there. So what has Maimonides done? He's pointed out 3 different ways that people mispronounce things. Right, they accent it incorrectly, they pronounce the shvas incorrectly, and they slur words together that have similar sounds. Right? It's no different today.
I have a husband who's a foreigner, and when he pronounces words so often in English, he does emphasize the wrong syllable, and then it either can mean something else, or I can't even imagine what the word is, because if it's multisyllabic, sometimes it's like, what? What does that mean? So I know that, like, oh, I just want you to pronounce it correctly so I can get it.
So hard though, because he's got Russian as his base, and I wouldn't even begin to think about what the rules of pronouncing things in Russian are.
Oh my God! Yeah,
we have to apply the rules and the patterns of our primary language to the next language that we learn.
Right. And in English, the accent on the first syllable makes a noun, a record, an advocate, a combine, and on the end, it's a verb: record, advocate, combine.
Yeah.
This stuff matters. All right. Yeah. So too, the zayin in tizkaru, this is in the 3rd paragraph, should be pronounced distinctly. And you will hear people do this. Tizkaru. Well, he doesn't say why. You may know why? We don't want to say tishakeru with a shin instead of a zayin, which would be to lie. Tizkaru is to remember. All right. One should dwell on the dalet in echad. All right, so there we've got the bottom of our screen. We have echad. Should dwell on the dalet in echad, a sufficiently long interval to enable one to acclaim God as sovereign in heaven and earth, and towards the 4 cardinal points of the compass. The chet in echad should not be pronounced hurriedly, for then the word would sound ichad. Okay, so let's break this down. First, how do you prolong the pronunciation of the letter dalet?
Not well.
Can anybody do it? Can anybody do it?
You need another vowel on the end.
You can't. It's a hard sound, right?
It has to finish the sound.
Right? Yeah. So what is Rambam talking about, right? You will hear, I'm sure you hear people in synagogue, echad, right? But Rambam doesn't say pronounce it louder. He says prolong the pronunciation, right? And the answer to this is that we are all pronouncing the dalet incorrectly. So this now comes to the dot that appears in the middle of some letters. There are 6 letters that have a dot or not have a dot, right? So you can see at the top of our page, there's a ketzad yidakdek, right? How do you pronounce the grammar correctly, right? Ketzad, look at that dot in the middle of ketzad. That's a kaf. If it wasn't, there was no dot there, it would be chetzad, right? So that dagesh, that dot, makes a difference in the pronunciation, right? It turns a k into a ch when it's not there. There are rules for when the dagesh appears and when it doesn't appear for ketzad. Basically, the rule is if there's a vowel sound immediately before it, the dot goes away. So since this is starting the sentence, the dot is there. Now, how about the yidakdek? So Dalet is another one of those 6 letters that can get a dot or not get a dot, depending on if there is a vowel sound before it. Now, remember we talked about earlier that the shva underneath the kuf is a shva nach, an immobile shva. In other words, it doesn't make a sound, which means that there is no vowel sound in front of the Dalet, which means that the Dalet keeps its dagesh, it keeps its dot. The way to pronounce a Dalet with a dagesh in it is the way that we pronounce a Dalet, duh. Now, what if there is a vowel sound in front of the Dalet? So then, according to the rules, the dagesh goes away. There's no dagesh. And according to the rules, it's pronounced differently. So how is it pronounced? Something like a th, which I can prolong. Now the word echad, right? It's got a vowel sound underneath the chet, which means that there's no dagesh in the Dalet, which means that the way to pronounce it, a long time ago, nobody pronounces it this way anymore, but except maybe the Yemenites, the way to pronounce it would be echad. And that is very easy to prolong.
Could you say that again?
Echad, like as in the.
Okay.
Right. Echad. Right. And so how long do I do that for? Until I can acknowledge in my mind, here we're talking about kavanah and probably in the way that we think about it today, that God is the sovereign of the heavens, the earth, and everything around me, all 4 directions. So that's what Rambam is suggesting. So, right. So if you're in synagogue and we get to the Shema, and or on your own, you get to the Shema, you can say echad, and you will be pronouncing this probably to how people were pronouncing it 2,000 years ago.
And nobody will know.
And nobody
Sorry,
will know what you're doing.
Yeah. Kind of interesting in Arabic, the dal with the dalet,
yes,
dal, the dalet without the dot.
Yeah, Arabic has this pronunciation.
You pronounce it exactly the same as you mentioned.
Also.
So when did this alternate pronunciation of the Dalet die out?
I don't know. It's a good question.
Sometime in the past 800 years.
I don't know, but the tradition of doing something different with the Dalet has continued, right? All right, the chet in echad should not be pronounced hurriedly, right? He doesn't want you to say echad, right? So he's worried that somehow you'll pronounce it echad, something like that, which would be echad. Means no. God is not one. So he wants you to make sure that while you're prolonging the Dalet, we still pronounce the word in a way that it's recognizable as echad. All right, that's a lot of rules about how to pronounce this thing.
Did you already talk about, I'm sorry if I missed it, but looking at Shema and the crowns, what do those mean? Oh,
that's the way that biblical Hebrew, that certain letters are written in the Torah. They're called the tagim, the crowns, the ornamentations. And so there's extensive detailed rules about the correct way to. My son's phone is going off. Excuse me.
He thought he was playing an instrument. It's so ornamental.
Sorry about that.
Right.
So there's extensive rules about the correct way to calligraph a Torah. I don't know those rules, but there are certain letters that get crowns above them. You see that throughout the Torah. These are not unique.
Yeah, I've seen them before, but do they actually have a meaning related to, Melech, the king, the crown, anything like that, or is that?
I think it's that idea that they're crowned, but like every Shema, every shin is going to have the crowns on it.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so the Shulchan Aruch picks up some of these things as well. And so Maimonides is 12th century, Shulchan Aruch is 16th century law code. So let's just see what some of the things that the Shulchan Aruch records. They're accustomed to recite the first verse in a loud voice in order to awaken the intention, right? That first line, the Shema, is really important, right? That one, minimally, you've got to have intention for. If by the time you get to Ve'ahavta, your mind is wandering and you're on rote recitation, it's okay. But the Shema has to be done with intention. They're accustomed to place their hands on their faces during the recitation of the first verse in order that one will not look at another thing that will restrain him from intention, right? So when we say, why do you cover your eyes for the Shema? It's to help you concentrate. That's exactly what the Shulchan Aruch is saying. We don't want to be distracted by anything else.
So when the bridegroom, if he's going to say Shema on that night, he's going to do this in front of his bride.
Oh, he better close his eyes. Yeah.
I think the reason is when you have communication with Hashem, it's done through the ear. We don't see the Hashem with our eyes. Only Moshe Rabbeinu was able.
Yeah.
So when you say Shema, you say, okay, I don't want to see a God, but I want to hear him.
Yeah.
And this is the way all the time we say, Daber bnei Israel. That means communication with God is through the ear, not to the eye. And this is kind of very basic, where even if you see God, it be during dream at night, but you don't see him by himself.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting.
I've heard people suggest that if we are saying the Shema with enough concentration, that the presence of God will actually come down before us, which again is not something that is done through sight, right? It's all right. Let's go next. It is necessary. Here's how the Shulchan Aruch is going to deal with some of the same things Maimonides just did. It's necessary to extend the pronunciation of the letter Chet of the word Echad in order to make the Holy One, blessed be He, sovereign in the heavens and the earth. All right. So why? Now the Shulchan Aruch gives us a different explanation. Chet, right? Chet in Gematria is the number 8. Right. So what is that? 7 heavens plus earth, right? So that's how the extending the letter Chet will help us have an awareness of God's sovereignty over the 7 heavens and the 1 earth. In that this hints at the humps in the middle of the roof of the Chet, right? So let's look at that Chet. You can see the Chet has a hump in the middle of it. So that's pointing up to the heavens. All right. One should also extend the pronunciation of the letter Dalet of the word Echad. The amount of time to think that the Holy One, blessed be He, is unique in His world and rules in the 4 directions of the world, but he should not extend more than this amount. There are those who have the custom to turn the head in accordance with the thought, up, down, and to the 4 directions. I've never seen that. Has anyone seen that? All right, this is what we do with the lulav, right? One should accentuate the dalet so that it's not like a resh. We did not see this in Rambam, right? What's the problem with a resh?
Acher.
Acher, which means another. Lord our God is another. That's a problem, right? And so since the dalet looks so much like the resh, here the Shulchan Aruch is saying we want to make sure that it's a dalet, not a resh.
What does accentuate? Does that mean in writing or pronounced?
I think it probably means lengthening. No, I think this is talking about pronunciation, right?
Okay,
This is not talking about the tradition of scribing the Shema, but the ayin
because they also look very similar.
Right. All right. What about a different language? Back to Rambam. Person may recite the Shema in any language that he understands. And if one reads the Shema in a secular language, he must take care to avoid errors in that language and be as scrupulous in correctly enunciating the Shema in that language as he would be if he were reading it in the sacred tongue. Right. Any language you can understand, but be careful.
How many languages can you say the Shema in?
Me, probably just one. Just maybe 2. All right. Here's the order on the left side of the page. We have the order of the 3 paragraphs of the Shema. First, we start with Deuteronomy chapter 6, and Deuteronomy chapter 11, and Numbers chapter 14. What is wrong with this picture?
It's out of order.
Not
It's out
together.
of order. It's out of order. That's a problem. All right, so now we're back to the Mishnah. Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha. Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha says, Lama kadma shma levahayam shema. So why does the Shema, the first paragraph, what we call the first paragraph, come before the second paragraph, right? Deuteronomy 6 before Deuteronomy 11. Ela chadei sheikabel alav ol malchut shemayim tchila, v'achar kach yikabel alav ol mitzvot. So that a person should accept upon themselves the yoke of the kingdom of heaven first, and afterwards accept upon themselves the yoke of the commandments. Right, so he's saying that there's a theological order here. First, I accept God's sovereignty over me, and then I can accept God's commandments over me, not the other way around. So what we're saying is that the essential theme of the first and the second paragraph are God's sovereignty, and then the second paragraph is the mitzvot. And then it goes on, Vayam Shemua Vayomer. So what about why the Deuteronomy 11 before Numbers 14, which is actually out of order in the Torah? Shevahayam Shemua Noheg Bayom Uvalayla Vayomer Eno Noheg Ala Bayom. Because the first one, Vayam Shemua, is operative in both the daytime and the nighttime, whereas Vayomer, the Numbers paragraph, is only in operation. It's customary only during the daytime. All right, we'll get to why it's customary only in the daytime, but we have an explanation in the Mishnah. First of all, we telling us what the order is and giving us an explanation of why it appears in that particular order.
We in California first select the governor and then we pay the taxes. If we pay the taxes first, we will not select the governor, of course.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right. But we still read all 3 paragraphs in the evening.
Sorry, say that again, Max?
We still read all 3 paragraphs in the evening.
Ah, yes, we do. But should we be? Does the Mishnah want us to?
Do we do what the Mishnah says, or do we do something more modern?
Well, we do something. So we recite in the evening service, we recite all 3 paragraphs, which you could certainly make a strong argument based on this Mishnah that the 3rd paragraph should not be said in the evening time. Right? I read actually there are a tradition of community that does not recite the part of the 3rd paragraph that talks about the daytime, or that's understood to be talking about the daytime, and just picks up in the second half of the paragraph where there's no mention of time. So maybe that's in keeping with the Mishnah. All right, so this is the 2nd paragraph. I don't want to read the whole thing out loud. We looked at this a bit last time, but you can see Vayam Shemoah, and if then you obey the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, right? So we start right in with talking about commandments. And so that's why the rabbis see this as the recitation of this as being a conscious accepting upon oneself of the obligation of following all of the commandments. Now, the 3rd paragraph, I think I missed, Numbers. This is the 3rd paragraph.
Somebody has to mute themselves.
That's so good.
Where's the 3rd paragraph in the book, Rabbi? In
Oh,
the Shema.
Let's see, if you're in the
I'm in the
Shabbat version, it'll be in
13.
Sorry.
113.
113. The Lord said to Moses as follows: Speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make for themselves fringes on the corner of their garments throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner. That shall be your fringe. Look at it and recall all the commandments and of the Lord and observe them, so that you do not follow your heart and eyes and your lustful urge. Thus you shall be reminded to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I, the Lord, your God. All right, why is this only during the day?
You can't see the blue fringe if it's dark.
Right, so that's exactly right. You got to look at it. Right. And remember, you always, I bring up a number of things that it's important to keep in mind when we're looking at these ancient texts. So one of those things is they did not have indoor lighting, and to illuminate
So they didn't have candles going, or
candles were exceedingly expensive.
Oh.
Yeah.
I have some other.
You could have like a little oil lamp that doesn't produce a whole lot of light, and that is also exceedingly expensive. So
But a light coming out of those elements of burning is the spectrum. Don't include the blue. Include only the red and maybe some yellow, but not the blue. And therefore, you can see a blue color, even if you have a candle.
Even with a
Try
candle.
to do it.
I didn't know that.
It's like the Sinai parking lot where they have those sodium lights and this eerie orange glow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or if you see neon lights at night that are signs that are blue, they're very hard to see.
So in any event, people keep in mind, people didn't have any lighting indoors. So, basically at nighttime, you couldn't see anything. So if you have anything that has to do with looking at something, the rabbis take that to mean it's to be done during the daytime. So that's why it said that this paragraph is not recited at night. So the tradition that I mentioned, I had read about, picks up at "Thus you shall be reminded." Leman tizkaru. Thus you shall be reminded to perform all of my mitzvot. And so it ignores the first half of this. So essentially, we've got two themes going on in this paragraph. The first theme is the tzitzit, and the second theme is redemption. God redeeming the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt. And then tying all of that together are the mitzvot, which is our covenantal obligations. Right? Think about the three themes that we have been covering in our prayers: creation, revelation, and redemption. We saw the first two blessings before the Shema, introducing creation and then revelation. The next blessing is going to have to do with redemption, but we see those three themes appearing in the Shema as well. In the first paragraph, which talks about God, loving God, and repeating all of God's words, teaching the words of God. So that's revelation. The second paragraph, with a focus on the mitzvot, but what is the reward and punishment manifested through for performance of the mitzvot? Creation, right? It has to do with the skies opening up or not opening up. So we see reference in the second paragraph to creation. And then finally here, we have redemption. And that is going to lead us to the completion of this part of the service. So we're going to have to stop here. We didn't quite get to the end, but we will next week and beyond.
Rabbi, you want to hear it in Spanish?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, in Spanish will sound like this. Escucha, Israel, el Señor nuestro Dios, el Señor es uno. And the word escucha is a commanding listen. You make it soft if you say to listen, the equivalent. And at the end, when you say uno, it could mean you, but you have to add like single one, like uno solo. That makes it single one. So
yeah, nice. Now, do you prolong the uno? No.
No. It will be uno solo. Uno solo.
Nice. All right. Well, Chag Sameach, everyone. It's exciting.
Chag Sameach. Thank you.
We'll wrap it up here. Any questions?
I have one little question. Yeah. If you are wearing glasses like you and I do, I take my glasses off when I cover my eyes. Does it make any difference if you do it over your glasses or without your glasses?
Well, without your glasses, you're less likely to get fingerprints.